Welcome back. Glad you could join me, especially in here because outside, man, is that wind nasty. I just finished working on some fencing and I was having trouble standing up. But hey, we're not here to talk about the weather. Let's talk about horses. And, well, I said I take requests, and recently one of my viewers asked me a question and suggested I do a video on the subject, and I thought it was worthwhile. I kind of talked about it a little bit in the past, but it's been a while, and I didn't go as in-depth into it as I probably should have. And it's a little more complex topic than first meets the eye. Now, the question that they asked me was, how do you help a horse get along with other horses? Now, helping horses is one of my things. That's what I like to do. Hey, buddy, how you doing? We like to help horses. So, given the opportunity, we definitely like to do that, and we'd like to suggest how you can possibly do it yourself as well, because in some cases it's actually pretty easy. And but if you don't know, well, it's hard. Pretty hard to do anything if you don't know anything about it. Anyhow, I'm going to break it down into three things, though, because as with any problem, the first thing you got to do is, figure out what is really the problem. Is it what we're seeing? Because I've talked about symptoms versus problems but many times. And what we're seeing isn't necessarily a problem. Sometimes it's a symptom of a problem. And I'll talk about that. Because the first thing that you're going to notice is when you put your horse out with another horse or another herd, all of a sudden there's all kinds of animosity and anything from... It might be pretty mild. It all depends on the horses. I've seen, all extremes. But you can get anything from some biting and kicking to squealing, ear pinning, and a little bit of posturing to pretty much nothing at all. Anywhere in between. And what can we do about that? Absolutely nothing. It's a 100% natural thing that horses do to determine the hierarchy in a herd and where they stand with a new horse. And sometimes they are giving a lesson to the other horses. Sometimes the other horses are giving them a lesson. It can go either way. But basically, it's a 100% natural thing. Nothing you need to worry about. It will eventually resolve itself. It may take minutes, hours, weeks. It might even take months before they start getting along real good. But, there's all kinds of variations in that. I'm rather fortunate. I get to observe that type of stuff a lot here because it's a boarding facility that, right now our main herd's pretty small. It's only a little over 20 horses. It can actually be double that. And when new horses come in, I've seen all kinds of different reactions. One new guy, he went through the herd challenging just about everybody to a fight until he determined where he stood in the herd, and that was the end of it. It lasted a couple weeks on and off, and eventually he's still here, and he's just a real nice horse too, and gets along fine with all of them. Happens to be the boyfriend of one of my mares. In fact, he's taken a liking to her. Other horses that have come in, there was nothing at all. They just kind of blended in, minded their own business, and the horses, the rest of the horses, tolerated them quite nicely. So when it comes to introducing new horses to a herd, one another, whatever, there's not really much you can do about it, or not much you should try and do about it, because if you try getting in between them, you might end up getting hurt yourself, because horses will be horses, and they'll sort it all out on their own eventually, and most of what you see, it's not really all that bad. I know some people, get a little concerned when they see the goings-on, and, it looks pretty violent sometimes, but it's really, most of it's just a lot of posturing and showing off, and, they're really not, there's nothing really all that serious happening. And basically, there's only two things that I would recommend when it comes to introducing new horses to one another is, first off, to make sure they got lots of room. Don't try doing it in a small paddock or something where the the lower horse has no place to go and can't get away from the other one. Do it out in a pasture where, if there's a bit of a problem, the other horse can get away. They can go places, and most times, as long as that horse keeps moving away, the other one will leave it alone. The other thing I do not recommend is, and a lot of people like doing this, is they like introducing horses to each other through a fence. I think that's actually kind of dangerous, because if they do not get along real good and start kicking at one another through the fence, somebody can wind up getting hurt real bad, get tangled in the fence, wreck the fence, get cut. You might even, in severe case, have to have the horse put down. I know of one particular case where that happened, and that horse was lame for the better part of a year before it was, it had recovered enough. The injury was pretty serious, and it was on electric tape. That most people would consider to be a fairly benign thing. It actually cut that horse bad enough that they had to treat it. I saw pictures of it. I didn't see the horse in person, but I saw pictures of it and heard the whole story about it. And that horse was being treated for almost a year, because of that injury. So introducing them through a fence, I don't think that's a good idea at all. Just introduce them in a pasture. Just make sure they got lots of room, and stand back and watch and let them sort it out. They will do it. And sometimes it can be a little concerning. For example, where is she? Oh, she's hiding behind the grays there. That little girl, last place I was at, when I introduced her into the new herd, the herd leader promptly started chasing her around and biting her on the backside. Well, it didn't surprise me too much, but what did surprise me is the fact that went on nonstop for about a half an hour. And at the end of a half an hour, I was starting to get a little bit concerned, and I was thinking, well, this isn't too cool, because they were literally running nonstop for half an hour while he was biting her on the backside. And then just about the time I was thinking, maybe this isn't going to work out, they came to a complete stop, and those two horses were best friends forever after. And I was there for several years after that, and they got along fine. So that's the first scenario is, horses that are being introduced to new horses. And this is where a lot of people say, my horse doesn't get along with other horses. I have to keep it separate in its own paddock or stall or whatever. You know what? Yeah, give them time. They will. They just, they see the initial reaction and get all concerned about it, and not realizing that's just 100% natural, and given time, they'll get along just fine. Another scenario, number 2, is horses that lack social skills. This is a tougher one. I have had some experience with this one. And honestly, I've got a few suggestions of how to deal with that one, but I've never had the time and opportunity to actually try it and see what would work. And it's horses that, depending on where they come from, some horses have chronically been kept in box stalls or small paddocks and isolated from the rest of the herd most of their life, and they don't learn how to get along with other horses. That's probably the toughest situation, because I'm not quite sure what to do about that. But I did have one like that. She came from a place that she had always been kept separate from the other horses, and she really lacked social skills. And unfortunately, I didn't quite understand much back then, and I couldn't help her. Maybe I could have, but I didn't. Well, I didn't know then, so I couldn't. Obviously, maybe I could now, knowing what I know now, but. Eventually, I had to rehome that horse because my other horses were beating on her, and she was starting to look pretty nasty. A few marks, nothing to worry about. They will heal up eventually, and they're just superficial, just cosmetic stuff. Don't worry about it. But when the horse is repeatedly getting kicked, and I'm seeing hoof prints on her side, well, eventually she's going to wind up with some broken ribs or something. And she just didn't know enough. I mean, she was a social horse. She wanted to be friends with the other horses. She just didn't know how to go about it. And when the other horses told her to get lost, she didn't listen because she didn't understand the language. And because she didn't go away, well, they'd tell her a little louder, which usually involved a bite or a kick or something like that. And Well, she ended up looking quite the mess, and eventually I figured for her own well-being, I'd rehome her. Now, in a case like that, now what I would probably do, but it would still be tough to do because you'd have to have a lot of control over the situation, what horses you can put it in with, that sort of thing. You'd have to pasture it with a couple other horses that are reasonably benign, that aren't terribly aggressive, and would be tolerant of her until she learned how to get along and communicate with other horses. That would be, as far as I can figure, that's about the only thing you can do is, just gradually up it. And I think that eventually their instincts will come back to them and they will learn how to socialize with other horses. Just a matter of time. Now, that's just my theory. I haven't had the opportunity to practice that one. Now, that's number two, is horses that simply don't have social skills because they haven't had the opportunity. And that actually happens quite a bit, particularly with things like race horses and such, where they're almost always isolated and stall kept, and they're not allowed to, be part of a herd. And, when they are, it's never for very long. So that's number two. They don't have social skills. They don't know how. And that best I can figure is that's going to take some time. That's all. But the third scenario, the one that I've also got some experience with this one too, it's kind of an interesting one, is horses, you'll get the occasional one, and it's usually not your own horse that's the problem. It's quite often one of the other ones, and they start acting like a bit of a bully. Well, when I first came across that one, I kind of thought about, well, in the case of a human, why does a human act like a bully? Well, generally it's because of insecurity. They're not real confident with what they know, who they are, and where they stand in the herd or group, whatever. If it's a human, it would be a group. So that's the theory I came up with, is like, well, it's not really a bad horse. It's not being mean. He just doesn't know how to behave anywhere else, and somehow that makes him feel a little better about himself if he goes around acting like a bully. And the one I had a little experience with, he used to run around the herd chasing the other horses and biting them just for the fun of it. And he was a bit of a character, that one. He was quite unpleasant sometimes. He was rather mean to the other horses. He was always chasing them around. Well, I had the opportunity to work with that horse for a little while, and I was just firm and fair, like I always am. And, once I provided him with some solid leadership and, a little discipline. And when I say discipline, I'm not talking about beating on the horse. That just simply means no means no. That's all. I'm not real harsh when it comes to stuff like that. But, we gave him some guidance. We taught him some things. We reinforced rules. And we give structure to his life. We gave him boundaries and structure that, he felt a little more stable, a little more solid. And all of a sudden one day I noticed he wasn't bothering the other horses at all. I thought that was pretty interesting because he became more confident in who he was and what he knew, that he didn't have the need to go around bullying other horses anymore. And, well, that was pretty much the end of it. He never did it again. Did I deal with it? No. I didn't work on the bullying thing one little bit. I worked on a whole bunch of other little things and just, gave him some structure to his life and some rules and boundaries. And, well, next thing you know, all of a sudden he decided he felt a little better about himself and he did not have the need to be a bully anymore. Now, if it was your own horse, well, do the same thing. Be firm and fair. Give it rules, give it boundaries, be consistent, and eventually, they'll start behaving a little better. Now, this one here, I actually have to work on her a little bit more because, well, she's pretty good with my other three, but when it comes to other horses, she tends to be a little insecure sometimes, and she'll pin her ears at them and chase them a little bit. Nothing too serious, but just enough to show me that she's still got some issues, which isn't bad considering what she was like when I first got her. But, it's one of those things where when she becomes more confident with who she is and feels better about herself, she's not going to feel the need to be aggressive towards other horses. So this is what you can do to help a horse that doesn't get along. Just teach it things, give it rules, give it boundaries, and then it'll eventually go, oh, I know where all the boundaries are now, and I know who I am. And they'll feel a little more confident about themselves, and they'll no longer feel it necessary to act like a bit of a jerk with the other horses. When it comes to someone else's horse that does that, well, I'm afraid there's not a whole lot you can do about it. What can you do to help the horse? Well, same thing, but if they don't allow you to do it or you don't have the skills to do it, it's not going to happen, unfortunately. And unfortunately, depending on where you're at, that's a tough one because, like, one of the rules, it's an unwritten rule, but one of the rules of boarding is that you don't mess with other people's horses unless they, specifically ask you to. So you kind of leave them alone. And, well, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, the horses, the owners might not come out more than, once a week or once a month even. You might never see them to even ask them about the situation. So I'm afraid it might be pretty hard to deal with it. So, but that's basically about the only scenario. The last one is that where you can actually do something to help the horse. And it's basically just give it some rules, give it some boundaries, and teach it some things, make it feel a little more confident about itself. And, it won't feel the need to be aggressive with other horses. It's, I know it sounds a little overly simple, but it really is pretty much that simple. And I kind of figured that one out myself by, when I started observing how the horses were behaving in certain situations compared to how a human bully, well, they're just insecure. A human bully is not really a bad person. They're just an insecure person. And a lot of people do not understand that. They figure they're this, bold, self-confident person that goes around pushing other people around. Well, no, they're not self-confident. They go around pushing other people around because they're not. Well, I took a psychology course, so I learned that a little bit too. But, a lot of this stuff you can apply to horses. It's the same thing, Why does a horse act a certain way? Well, look at, back up, don't just look at what the horse is doing, figure out why it's doing it. That's the main thing. If you want to help the horse, you got to figure out why it's doing what it's doing. Then maybe you can help. Oh, by the way, this used to be a horribly hard to catch and a very sketchy, spooky, worried horse. Well, as you can see, she's not quite like that anymore, but we still got to work on her a little bit, but she's doing pretty good. And she's actually a very gentle, affectionate, very social, She'll stand here all day, but so anyhow, that's about sums it up. 3 different scenarios on, the first one. Well, it's not usually near as bad as you think when introducing new horses, and the best thing you can do is nothing at all. Just let them be horses, and they'll sort it out on their own. And the second one is horses with a lack of social skills. Well, that one I don't have a firm set answer to, but a few things that you can try is just put them out with some horses that are, that they're going to possibly get along with, reasonably tolerant horses, and give them time. And I think maybe they'll come around because the socializing with other horses is part of their instincts. I think it's even in a horse that has been growing up with a total lack of herd interaction. I think the instinct's still there. So given time, I think it will come back, and they eventually will learn how to get along with other horses. Again, that's just my theory. You'll have to try it out and see if it works. Third scenario, again, a horse that acts like a bit of a bully, well, it's just insecure. Help it feel better about itself and teach it some things, give it some boundaries, and that's about it. So how to help a horse get along with other horses? Well, sometimes there's not a darn thing you can do about it. Sometimes there's nothing you should do about it. Sometimes it's something pretty simple, like just make them feel a little better about themselves. No tricks or gimmicks to it. Have a good day.